I now have the opportunity to introduce to you my friend and colleague from Citi, Bob Annibale. Bob is the Global Director of the Microfinance and Community Development area at Citi. We'd like to thank Citi and Bob for their sponsorship of last night's dinner at the House of Lords. It was really great, and Anna Grodska gave an amazing, amazing talk. Yeah. Bob manages Citi's partnerships with global, national, and local organizations to support community development through economic empowerment and financial inclusion, focusing on responsible and accessible finance, education, and asset building, neighborhood preservation and revitalization, access to college education, and small business and micro-enterprise development. Bob also leads Citi's commercial relationships with microfinance and other financial institutions, networks, and investors, working across Citi's businesses and geographies to expand access to financial services in underserved communities. Since joining Citi, Bob has held a number of senior treasury, risk, and corporate positions in Athens, Bahrain, Kenya, London, and New York. He has served on many external boards and councils, including the Board of Advisors for the United Nations Commission on Legal Empowerment of the Poor. Please join me in welcoming to the stage my good friend, Bob Annibale.
Wow, good afternoon. And I know I'm amongst the last just before this panel, and I want to thank everyone at Out and Equal. I first became, I guess, acquainted with Out and Equal some years ago, over 10 years ago, and it was Kevin at that time at Citi who really introduced me, and I went to your conference in Milwaukee. That was a long time ago, and have been involved in other things along the way, and it really was this last year with the opportunity to be involved in this event here in London that I re-engaged, and I must say I'm very excited to be here and to be a part of that. Also, one of our colleagues, Ivan, who you might have heard spoken to the minister speak about, the Member of Parliament from Italy this morning, who heads Parks Diversity in Milano, also was a colleague at that time at Citi. And so I'd love to share with you just for a moment one or two thoughts about Citi and Out and Equals, are linked to Out and Equal, but more, this is a room full of very like-minded people, I think, and similar positions that major corporations have taken. And I was left very directed and even moved by Harry's talk yesterday morning from IBM about the next steps and the call to action in many ways, which I think many of us want to leave with some specific goals and tasks other than just within our own companies, for which I think we can learn a lot from some of the organizations that spoke in the last day or so. But also, we're an unusual company, too. We're in over 100 countries. And I always have to remind people, we were in the Congo before we were in Connecticut. We were in Calcutta the same year we opened in London. And this month is the first month of our third century. It's just finished our 200-year anniversary. And so we're an eclectic organization in many ways, with offices all over the world, and a base that originated in New York, but one that has found itself embedded in many other countries for decades, if not over a century. That brings many of our challenges and learnings about the work that some of you also are doing on how to extend the reach of LGBT initiatives, networks, advocacy beyond our home markets. Clearly, coming out of New York, as a New Yorker originally, I did leave. I studied here in graduate school. I was hired by Citi in New York, and with the intent to go to Africa. And I never worked in New York for them. I went straight to Athens, and from Athens to Bahrain, and worked in the Middle East and North Africa, and then I went to London, then to Nairobi, and covered all of Africa, and then London, New York. And as my career developed, and I was in Treasury and Risk, like others who've spoken, the challenges of having a partner and having international mobility in a multinational became clear. And Citi was incredibly accommodating. And that was, I think, out of a conviction as well as out of practicality of wanting the job done. And I was, now this year is my 20th year with my partner, And we're both a dual national, so we both have British nationality, but he has Brazilian and I have American passports. So we can live in a lot of places freely, and probably Brazil, by some of the high court rulings now, much more accommodating, but not the United States. And from an early part of my career, that was, relative. I was aware of it and hadn't really thought through it very much. And at one stage, we had one of our, Bob Rubin, was the head of Citigroup, one of the vice chairmen. He had been the secretary of the Treasury. And in speaking about, my taking a position in New York, and I mentioned, well, I really can't be posted here full time without just splitting my family. He said, well, why don't we just get him a visa? I said, I mean, it'd be nice if you could, but there is not even a box to check off. There is no provision in the law, and he doesn't come here to study English or something. I met him doing postdoctoral work in the UK, so he wasn't going to come to America just to hang out. And so my own career, I've always felt, though, I was privileged. Right? I was already at a reasonable level. There was probably a commercial reason to accommodate, and Citi did. And I have, in this most current role, I have my primary base in London and an office and an apartment in New York, and I commute, and we live our mad life traveling all the time, as I always have. But it brings to light still, even in our home markets, such as the United States, where 30 states or so discriminating against sexual orientation is not a crime, or firing someone for that. A whole range of issues in the United States, as well as still in some parts of Europe, as we heard this morning, are real to us. But what I think this next panel approaches is the challenge that our joint efforts could really make a difference on are the many other countries, in addition to the work we need to continue to do in Europe and the United States and other markets. But it is about our footprints in some of the most difficult markets, in Africa, in the Middle East, in parts of Asia. Part of it is just bringing an awareness in our own organizations of our own opportunity. I think the work that we saw, again, showing the different levels for which the stages that one goes through in terms of expanding LGBT activities in a corporation is one that we're embracing and really questioning and challenging ourselves around. We launched a new network in Mexico, and we have a very big bank in Mexico. We have 5 times the number of branches in Mexico as we do the whole of the United States. So there are many, many places, I think, where as we begin to look at how to replicate, I think there's a lot that can be done in tandem of many of the organizations that are sponsors and participants here today. I particularly think that's going to be the most challenging, where we need to step forward and look at markets where our employees would be endangered legally in one form or another, whether it's those gathering data, or those, of course, who are employees who might have to reveal even their sexual orientation. How do we handle that? How do we create a balance, and also jointly the influence of our common and combined weight as corporations? There are very large companies around the world that have now moved all of us into this space. Jointly, we have a much stronger voice. That became the case in very much in advocacy, and it continues to be in Washington and in other capitals. But I do think we need to think about it strategically and differently, and jointly in many of the other markets around the world and countries that we all live in, where our employees and our colleagues, and of course the community in general, would be open to many other risks if we don't do this well. So I leave with a real thought from the last day and a half about collaboration and the need for us to collaborate, and we'll need help of organizations that can help achieve that, not just businesses, but with civil society and government in these different contexts. The other was I had to listen, in the last few days, it really brought to me as I listened, the role of straight allies. It's a term that only became really apparent, and even at Citi over the last 2 years, I guess. I can think about it. And I was on a call not that long ago with our last chairman, where I was talking, and he was speaking about, and it was about straight allies. And our last chairman was very interesting. And he said, of all the people to talk about diversity, I think I'm one who can do it. He said, I'm an African American. When I married my wife, it would have been illegal probably in some of the states in the United States. I have one daughter that's disabled. I have another daughter who's a lesbian. And I have a son who's a challenge. He said, so I feel very comfortable talking about diversity. And I felt very comfortable that was the chairman of our board. And we also have a CEO who was born in India, who's a naturalized American. We have a very diverse organization, and we always have, that I've worked at. It took me many years working at Citi before I worked for anyone who was American or British, for that matter. My first bosses were Bahraini, and then I had Egyptians and Pakistanis and Indian nationalities. But the whole challenge still of bringing up gender identity, LGBT issues at a senior level in many corporations is one that we heard about earlier. It's still one we need to build and develop on. But more importantly, how do we export that to other markets in an appropriate way with a process? The role of straight allies has been critical. And the more I go back and think about it, I didn't have any gay mentors at Citi. I had some friends, but nobody more senior. And not even anyone who was at the same level that I can think of at certain points in my career. But I definitely had straight allies. And it turned out, including very senior management, that I wouldn't have thought. But they were so critical, as they were in many of our personal lives as we became out and lived our broader personal existence. They were for me, and I think for many of us in our workplace. So I believe that is another sense of maturity of us as a group and our ability to really think now, how do we embrace the support of our colleagues in the community? And there are many issues which we share with, I notice in Citi, with our other networks. Anti-bullying is a big one. Our parents group, our roots group, our women's movement, all of us want to work on an issue such as that. It's a crime that's against all of our communities. And so there are areas we can collaborate, but certainly on our roles in LGBT issues. I think for us at Citi, straight allies are going to play a very important role, especially as we enter some new communities where they will not have even the external organizations to anchor us. We don't have an Out and Equal in most countries we operate in. We don't have a Stonewall even. We have very small and sometimes certainly underfunded and under-resourced LGBT communities that are often under assault. So two of the things we really want to leave with from this conference is collaboration between many of the companies that are here and trying to advance within our organizations, but in some new geographies that are going to take strategy and thinking. And the other is to continue to build off of one another's lessons around straight allies. So with that, I want to thank everybody for having us as one of the sponsors, but also for sharing so much that you have from your own companies and your experience. And of course, to Out and Equal, which, this is well deserved to have a global summit, and I think the need is enormous, and we'll be very supportive as take this further in the years ahead. So thank you all very much.